Morning, students. Okay, so we're moving on now to straight line graphs or linear graphs. We're going to talk about three things today: gradients, x and y intercepts, and the form y equals mx plus c. First of all, what is a gradient? Okay, a gradient has to do with linear graphs. Linear graphs are simply graphs that graph as a straight line. So the gradient is the slope of the graph. So it might have a steep one, or it might have not so steep. And it also might go down. So the first thing we need to remember is that if a line rises from left to right, it's a positive gradient. If a line falls from left to right, it's a negative gradient. Now, gradients are normally found by finding the change in y values over the change in x values. Those little symbols just mean the change. And they're also designated by the gradient is sometimes called m. The x and y intercepts are simply where the line intercepts the y-axis and the x-axis. So there is the x-intercept, and that point there would be the y-intercept. Y-intercept, x-intercept. Okay? And then the form y equals mx plus c. For example, a graph might be called y equals x plus 2. Well, the number in front of the x there has to be a 1. This is a linear graph. Or y equals 5x minus 3. Or y equals a half x plus 1. They're all in the form y equals mx plus c. Anyway, let's have a look at this graph to start with. So here's a linear graph. It's a linear graph because it graphs as a straight line. And let's see if we can find, first of all, the gradient of this graph. So the gradient, remember, is the rise over the run, or the change in y values over the change in x values. So let's just pick 2 points, like we find there and there. And on this graph, here's 0, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in this case here, that's the y-axis, and this is the x-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. So there are just the points on that x-axis and y-axis. And this obviously is the point 0, 0. To find the gradient here, I've got to find the change in y values over the change in x values. And the easiest way to do that is just draw my dotted lines here. So what's the change in y values? To get from here to there is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I go up 4. To go across there, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the gradient here would be 4 over 8, or 1/2. If I pick 2 other points on the graph, I'll get the same gradient. So there's 2 points there. Look here. The change in y values is 2. The change in x values is 4. 2 over 4 is the same as 4 over 8. 1/2. So my gradient is a half. So I can start forming the equation for this line, because y equals mx plus c, the gradient m or m just stands for the gradient. So the equation for this line is going to be y equals a half x plus c. But what's c? C in this means the y-intercept. And the y-intercept here is 3. So the equation for this line is y equals a half x plus 3. That's the equation for that line. And while we're at it, if that's the y-intercept, the x-intercept is down here. That's where it intercepts the y-axis, this where it intercepts the x-axis. This is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. So that, if I had to tell you what the x-intercept would be, it's -6. Let's look at another one. Whoops. So what do you notice about this graph? It's going down from left to right. So straight away, it's got a negative gradient. But let's find 2 points and find the gradient first of all. Now, notice, to get from this point to that point, I'm going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the change in y is -6. And the change in x values is a +2. The gradient is -3. And again, I could find 2 other points anywhere along there and get that same value. Now I've got to find the y-intercept. The y-intercept here is there at the point -2. So if I had to write the equation for that graph, it would be y equals -3x plus -2, or y equals -3x minus 2. And that's in the form y equals mx plus c, where m is the gradient and -2 is the y-intercept. And look at the intercepts on this graph here. Well, we know the y-intercept's -2. The x-intercept would be here, which looks like about -2/3 or something. All right. So gradients is the change in y values over the change in x values. The x and y intercepts are simply where the graph intercepts the y-axis and the x-intercept. And y equals mx plus c is the general form of a graph. Okay, we'll go to the next video and have a look at 3 worked examples on how to calculate gradients, how to calculate the gradient from y equals mx plus c, and also looking at the x and y intercepts.